This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. And welcome back to the City of God podcast, where we are weekly talking about today's biggest cultural issues, all through the lens of God's infallible word. My name is Rob Pacienza. I'm the host of the City of God podcast, and today I'm sitting down with my good friend, Chad Volkert. Chad, you are a member of our church, Coral Ridge Presbyterian. Your children go to our school, Westminster Academy. You are a global solutions leader with 20 plus years of executive experience, and I wanted to bring you onto the City of God podcast to talk about the integration of faith and work. But first of all, welcome to the City of God.
Well, Rob, it's great to be with you. Excited to talk with our listeners and followers and share as many little nuggets of how to bring faith into the workplace as possible. So very happy to be with you.
Chad, let's talk a little bit about the work that we're involved in together. I represent the church and church leadership. You represent marketplace leadership. But I think one of the things that's exciting about what's happening at our church and the work of the Institute for Faith and Culture is we're trying to figure out, how do we begin to talk to each other more? For far too long, it's been the church just doing all the talking, and now we're setting up initiatives and programs where I'm beginning to listen to individuals in your sphere of influence and learning that this is a integration that is far too often neglected in the church, of actually discipling and equipping individuals like yourself, not just to do church work and to serve on church boards, but actually be sent out on Monday morning to do the faithful work of the Christian in the marketplace. So explain to our audience a little bit about the work of the Institute for Faith and Culture, and in particular, this newest initiative we have called the Executive Roundtable.
Absolutely, Rob. I think back to Sunday mornings and leaving church after listening to you, being empowered with the Word of God. And that's wonderful, taking that back to the family, maybe over brunch that afternoon. But really, the mission is just beginning there on the first day of the week. You have to carry that in Monday to Friday, even Saturday for those that are working longer work weeks, and think about how to bring those Christian Bible views and ethical standards into the workforce. And that's a challenge. And so as you and I were meeting about the growth of the Institute and all the great things you're doing there, we said, how can we begin to impart this biblical worldview Monday to Friday to executives and leaders, starting in South Florida, but quite frankly, around the country and around the world, to be able to bring those best practices into the workforce and change the lives of what could be countless thousands of employees. And so we have set up the Executive Roundtable. We've kicked that off over the last year with a number of events, and I'm happy to go into further detail around that. But that's really the first step in the mission to empower business leaders to carry the cross Monday through Friday.
Yeah, and it's so important. As I said in my introductory comments, for far too long, it's been the church doing all the talking, and the business professional like yourself wondering, where's my place? Is the only sacred work, volunteering at the church or volunteering at our school? And we're really trying to destroy that paradigm, this separation of sacred and secular, and communicate to individuals like yourself that if you belong to Jesus, everywhere you go, that is sacred work. That is sacred calling, or at least you're supposed to be performing sacred work and performing your sacred calling wherever you go. It really was the time of the Middle Ages and the medieval church that began to really separate. You had the sacred work done by the clergy and maybe the elite classes, and you had the commoner or the person in the marketplace was doing what was called secular work, and you began to see this secular sacred divide. And what we're doing at the Institute and the Executive Roundtable is really trying to destroy that false dichotomy that you can either do sacred work or secular work and say all work is sacred if you belong to Jesus Christ. So dive in a little bit about the work, the important work that you are gleaning from when it comes to the Executive Roundtable. What are some of the events? What are some of the programs, past and future?
Sure. Well, and touching on this division of the secular nature, as you described, going back all the way to the medieval times, I think part of what we need to do is bring to light the great leaders that are in the business community leading through faith. So one of the first things we did with Executive Roundtable is have a fireside chat with three distinct executives, Charlie Alshire, Brent Burns, and Robert Taylor, where they sat down and shared how they have brought faith and Christian values into their places of work for many, many years. And so I think part of it is, yes, there is a divide, but there's also leaders that are out there doing it that have not been doing it in the public square per se. And that's what we need to bring to light. The amount of interest in the Executive Roundtable, leaders are isolated. Yeah. Right? All leaders can be isolated, let alone Christian leaders in the workforce. Maybe they're walking around on eggshells, worried about what to say, what not to say. And part of our events is how to bring forward your Christian faith in the appropriate and professional way in the workforce. Wear it on your sleeve wherever appropriate. People will now know where you stand, and Christ is first in your life. But what does that mean? That means grace, ethics, virtues, right? Other things that the Christian can bring to the table. And so no matter if you're Christian or not in the workforce, if you have a leader leading through Christian faith values, you know that's someone that you can trust, that you can rely on to take you to new heights within the business world.
And, I think the future is bright. I think the sky's the limit of what we can do. I mean, in the future, we're thinking about creating booklets and resources and podcasts and other types of events. Now, I think we need to make it very clear. There's people listening to this podcast from all around the country. Right now, it's a South Florida Executive Roundtable, but I think we can give them a sneak peek as far as, the dream, the vision of the next 5-10 years would be to do what with the Executive Roundtable?
Well, a couple of things coming down the runway that are already in play is we will be launching the Executive Roundtable website. On that website will be numerous thought leadership and faith-based materials for leaders to use within the workforce, within their family, and at home, which will be outstanding. We're going to be launching the Executive Roundtable podcast, which is going to be a monthly show highlighting faith-based Christian leaders and their best practices of how they're sharing their faith in the workforce. And we're going to be running quarterly events. We started with 2 a year. We're hopefully moving to quarterly events in South Florida, many of which we're looking at videoing, making live streams where possible. And then the final piece to this as we move forward is looking for other churches and business leaders in large cities like Atlanta, Tampa, Washington, D.C., New York, across the country to start Executive Roundtable chapters and tie their faith into the best practices of some of the most renowned business leaders in the country.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Go to institutefc.org, institutefc.org. That's the website for the Institute for Faith and Culture, and you'll find out as we're releasing and announcing our faith and work initiatives under the banner of the Executive Roundtable. Go to institutefc.org to find out more. Now, Chad, explain to our audience, because they might go, okay, it sounds good, but is it necessary? It sounds like this is it's added, a great deal of value to your life and to your work, but this goes deeper, and it's much bigger than just, hey, this kind of gives me a leg up in what I'm doing. Why is a church walking alongside of you, and in particular an institute walking alongside of you, absolutely critical as you are influencing and impacting hundreds, if not thousands of people on a daily basis?
Well, Rob, you think about, even in my own experience, hiring literally thousands of individuals over the years, large teams, not only within our own organization, but as we deploy consultants across the globe. companies and leaders and employees are looking for passion, for foundation, and the Christian faith brings all of those things together, right? We live in a very upside down world, right? As you often say, right? You have unethical behavior happening all over the place. You have reverse racism and discrimination, and you have individuals within the workforce that don't know what to say, not to say, how to sort of work through challenges because they can't trust many of their leaders or don't know where those foundational principles lie. And so I think as leaders within corporate America and around the globe, you need a foundation. You need a principled foundation. And what better place to find it than in the Christianity and the faith-based religions, right? Again, not everybody has to be a Christian, but knowing where you stand, bringing those principles through and the compassion and the grace that you can lead with is really, really important in today's world, especially with all of the changes, all of the turmoil that are going on in the workforce.
You know, I often think about our work at the Institute and our work at the Executive Roundtable. And, you know, the passage that often comes to mind is Ephesians 4, where Paul says to the evangelist, to the pastor, to the shepherd, to the leader, that we are called to do the work to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And I think what's profound about that is it's not my job as a pastor to do all the work of ministry. It's my job as a pastor to equip you, the saint, the person that's been called by Jesus and set apart by the gospel, empowered by the Holy Spirit. My job is to equip you to go out into the marketplace and into the public sphere to do the work of ministry that you are in many ways being called into a sphere that might have so much more influence than I ever will have, that you have access, as we just said, to hundreds, if not thousands of people that might never darken the doors of the church. So the church better be in the business of equipping their people on Sunday morning to be effective missionaries and ministers to go out into the marketplace, just as you're doing. Now, you talked about unethical behavior in the workplace. And I think, you know, there might be some that are not sitting in the seat that you're sitting in and walking in the shoes that you're walking in that go, is it really that crazy out there? Is the marketplace as bad as people, you know, make it out to be? I mean, we hear the stories of DEI and reverse racism and Marxism and the wokeism that's creeping into, yes, our institutions of higher education, but even into the business world as well. I mean, enlighten our audience. I mean, how pervasive is this unethical behavior, and how pervasive is the anti-Christian worldview in the marketplace of ideas right now?
Yeah. Well, what's happened is myths have been spun up over the years, right? Many people try to use Jefferson's words in a letter about separation of church and state. Couldn't be further from the truth, right? Yep. Jefferson actually led church services in the halls of Congress every Sunday, right? So this country has been founded on biblical truth and a trust and belief in God. And what's happened over the years, based on court rulings and other DEI initiatives, ESG initiatives, and quite frankly, simply secular leadership principles, that divide has become even greater. And employees are scared, quite frankly, in many organizations to share any form of belief. They could, again, be Christian, Jewish, of any faith, or no faith at all. And they're simply timid and scared because there is nobody standing up for freedom of speech in the workforce, freedom of Christian and faith-based expression, right? Which is a core foundational principle of this great nation, right? Sure. And the reality is, what you can do, and I appreciate you said saints, but I like to refer to us as shepherds. Let's not get to the sainthood yet, yeah. But the reality is we are shepherds of the church's mission. And if the pastors and great leaders such as yourself and Faith can share with us the biblical truth, and then we provide a mechanism similar to the executive roundtable to take that out into the workforce and empower ourselves to communicate that way, the world will be changed, and rapidly, right? Yeah. The biggest impact that business leaders that believe in Jesus, that are faith-based, can have in the world is in the workplace, where they spend 60 plus hours a week.
Right.
And those are the people they can change and change their mind and bring the Lord to them.
All right, we're throwing around acronyms, assuming that our audience knows them. DEI, I'm pretty sure our audience is fairly familiar with the HR principles and programs that have been put in place to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion. But ESG, explain that to our audience and kind of the fatal flaws of ESG and how that really is corrupting the marketplace.
Environmental sustainability and governance, right, is how this web has been driven, sure, right, in and around companies to be thinking first and foremost about some of those principles versus, in my opinion, thinking about the employees and what benefits the employees, right? Companies are built for profit, right? Unless you're in the nonprofit world, right? Sure. Doing wonderful things, but they're built to make a profit. Why? So they can hire more people, provide the American dream or the world dream, right? To live middle class, upper class, to grow and to achieve. And by putting restraints, constraints, whatever word you want to use, in and around any of these initiatives, right, prevents the growth of not only the company, but all of the individuals within the company. Now, I firmly believe in doing things that are important for the environment and sure, sustainability and all of those wonderful things. But when you begin to layer that as more important than the success of the organization in business that's done ethically, mind you, right? So that's sure, that's a caveat, right? And leading people through principles, it becomes a roadblock and a destructive interference.
Well, I think the same can be said about DEI. As men of God, we're all about diversity. The question is, how do we achieve it? Mm-hmm. There is a biblical way of achieving diversity. There's a biblical way of caring for the environment. And then there's one that's been corrupted by Marxism. Mm-hmm. There is a Marxist understanding of how to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right. And there's a Marxist and an atheistic way of achieving care and stewardship of the environment and how it can get turned upside down so quickly. So where are you seeing this practically, whether in your business or other businesses? Where are you actually, how would, if somebody's listening to this and going, I wonder if this is affecting my business, if I wonder if this is affecting my industry, what would be the things that they're listening for and looking for to go, wow, this has begun to really corrupt my industry or my place of work?
Yeah, I would say, Rob, first and foremost, you need to be proactive and take a hands-on approach. What we see are many leaders and executives that are allowing, rightfully so, their teams to run aspects of the business, but they have become devoid of being involved in the details that maybe they founded the company or founded the business on, right? And so it's very important to look at what's happening sort of throughout the organization and make sure that it's really tailored to the mission of the business, right? And far too much we begin to recede power to areas of a company that may have other alternative type of, thoughts in mind, right? And don't have the interests of the organization in mind all the way to the top. Are there people preventing the information getting to leaders? Are they putting a different spin on it? Why are we taking the stance as a leader that is being put out there, right? Is it in based on biblical and ethical and other virtuistic type beliefs, or is it not, right? Are we following a trend? And we all have seen where trends have led some of these companies over the last few years, and quite frankly, the backlash, both legally as well as from a profit standpoint, of people saying, enough is enough. We're going to move away from those companies because they don't have family-based Christian values at the heart of what they're doing, and they are now becoming some sort of a political activism type of an organization.
Yeah. And I think we can be encouraged. It does seem like in the last 6 to 9 months, we've certainly seen, particularly with the Trump administration, the pushback from people that are like-minded about traditional values, if not Judeo-Christian values and a explicitly biblical worldview, really push back against the woke culture and woke ideology and the fatal fruit of cultural Marxism like DEI and ESG. So it does seem like there's a lot of reason for hope. But why in this moment in particular is it so critical for Christian executives, Christian leaders, to be explicit about their faith, not just at the ballpark and in the community and at church, but why is it so critical right now for them to be explicit about their faith, particularly in the workplace?
Well, I would ask them, if not you, then who?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you're out leading people and you are a leader and you are a Christian, then you need to arm yourself with how to share your beliefs, not necessarily to convert the world, right? If you can bring individuals to Christ, wonderful. But this is, again, how to run a business with God at the forefront and family second, right? And the growth of the organization will follow. I've often said, as you lift people up, your organization or your division or whatever you're running rises, right? Yeah. And one of the greatest ways to do that is come in with a Christian perspective, lead with grace and your ethics and your virtues on your sleeve. And what I find very interesting, and I hear this from executives at the Executive Roundtable, but in my travels across the country all of the time, as they become more passionate about letting people know that they are a Christian and they are a leader that follows Christ right into the workforce, people migrate to them. Mm-hmm. People are hungry for that. This is what the country was founded on. And when you show that you are open to that, people will follow, right? And that is a great, great thing. And again, as long as they're coming along understanding that you are a truthful, ethical leader, the rest sort of, just becomes very smooth. And that culture is a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up because it really does, when you start thinking about the great leaders of the marketplace, and some of them that you mentioned that we know personally right here in our own backyard, the Robert Taylors, the Charlie Alshires, the Brent Burns, they really blow up that false dichotomy that you either on the one hand need to be a man of integrity and a Christian man in private and public, or you're wildly successful and turn a profit and you're known as an industry leader, but you can't have both. And they really do blow up that false dichotomy and have really led by example in our lives personally, but throughout this region, if not the nation, that you can pursue God-centered excellence and be a leader of leaders and a leader of your industry, but also operate with that moral compass that is only found in God's infallible word. I also think of an individual, Dan Cathy, his father, Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. In his talks, he often talks about the redemptive bottom line, that there should be there's a bottom line and then there's a redemptive bottom line in which we are measuring success by as an organization, that there should be something different about this business, about this industry, because Christians are at the top. of this business. So the way we hire, the way we fire, the way we develop our staff, our value systems, our generosity to the community and beyond.
One thing that you mentioned, and our great friend Chris Clements, CFO of the Miami Dolphins, he and I have long talked about this, and I know we're going to have him on as a guest of the Executive Roundtable podcast, hopefully in one of the first few episodes. But it's amazing that athletes can come to the mic after a victory or a loss and give glory to God and wear their faith on their uniform openly within those large competitive arenas, really speaking to millions of people around the globe. Yet executives within businesses are timid to do that.
Yeah.
And there's something that I think we can learn from that environment, that it's okay, right? You need to lead with that type of passion. And it's okay that people know that you're a man or a woman of faith and you're leading with those principles.
Yep, absolutely. And that's what excites me about the Institute and the Executive Roundtable, that we can do our small part of giving these individuals a platform to lead by example, to let Christian executives all around the nation, if not beyond, know it's not only appropriate, but it's absolutely necessary to lead with integrity. You can do it. Here's great models. Here's great examples. But we do it first and foremost because our ultimate allegiance is to Jesus. But we also do it because we actually believe we have the greatest message in the world. Right. And why wouldn't we want to use our platform? Why we wouldn't want to use the influence and affluence that God has given us to advance his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven? I'm sitting here today with Chad Volkert, member of our church. As I said, children go to our school, good friend, been a founding member of the Executive Roundtable. He's a global solutions leader with over 20 years of executive experience. And I'd just like to end this podcast by going back to this concept of the Executive Roundtable. Like I said, we've just launched this regionally. We hope this eventually becomes a national movement. Our audience could walk away going, oh, that's another great platform for teaching and equipping. They're going to have events and resources and podcasts. But speak a little about the fellowship aspect of it, the ability for executives to sit together and not just hear from thought leaders, but to hear from each other, to build, as our good friend Stephen Mansfield would say, at least in our first initial round of executive leadership roundtables, just that band of brothers and how important that is, in addition to all of the other resources and teaching that the Institute and the Executive Roundtable is providing.
Yeah, well, I touched on it a little bit earlier, Rob, but a leader in most organizations can be a very lonely place, a lonely role, right? You're one of just a few, if not the only one, depending on your situation. You couple that with being a Christian leader of faith, and I think it becomes a little bit lonelier based on all the things we talked about today and some of the evils and initiatives over the last number of years that have really separated the faith from the workplace. So this idea of bringing leaders together with common beliefs and the trust in the Lord, and they can share their problems, not talk about all their successes. Everybody can brag and do their successes all the time, right? This is a place where you can talk candidly about your business struggles, about best practices, share successes with others that they can learn from, understand how to balance your work life and very important, your Christian life and your family, right? As I always say, God first, family second, followed by everything else, right? And at the end of the day, if you're not leading your life and balancing your time, that becomes a very dark struggle, right? And that can lead leaders to go in a different direction and not one that's good. I think the other key thing with bringing these leaders together is understanding that they have the understanding of the impact that they can make. Listen, what things like Westminster Academy is doing for the high schoolers, the grade schoolers. We have a wonderful community of Christian schools around the country that I think are bringing up individuals in God's light. But then you go off to university, and we understand the challenges and the secular nature and the Marxism being taught in most universities. The next place you have to impact the next generation is when they're 21, 22, coming out of school and going to work for 50 hours a work week. And that's a time where the leaders can come together and bring those individuals, quite frankly, back to the fold and instill Christian values and let them firmly believe that it's okay to operate in this type of a way. And so I think all of those things coming together, breaking bread, and some of the events we do really refresh the soul, quite frankly, is what I've heard from many of the executives, and energize them to do God's work during the work week in the workplace.
Yeah, and I would just challenge our audience. You don't have to wait for us to launch an executive roundtable chapter in your city. I think just start with finding a group, another individual that can hold you accountable, that you can fellowship with. As you said, being an executive, being a leader at any level can be lonely, and it only gets lonelier as you grow and as you gain an influence and affluence. And it's so important that Christian leaders and Christian executives have that grounding, but also have friends and colleagues that they can be honest with. They can be transparent. I'm struggling in my marriage. I'm struggling with my children. Struggling with an unethical situation at work, whether it be directly or indirectly. The Church of Jesus Christ, we're saved individually, but we're saved to community, and we need that community in the marketplace as well with other Christian executives. Well, Chad, thank you so much for being on City of God podcast. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for your belief in the Institute and the Executive Roundtable.
Thank you, Rob, and for all that you do. We appreciate your leadership more than you know.
And that's all the time we have for the City of God podcast today. If you enjoyed this conversation with Chad Volkert, as we talked about the work of the Institute for Faith and Culture and the work of the Executive Roundtable, we pray that you would pass it along to a family member, a friend, anyone who's interested in exploring the integration of faith and work. We pray that you would join us again next week, right back here on the City of God. The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.